According to a 2019 report titled The Best and Worst Places to Be Woman in Canada, Barrie ranked at the bottom out of 26 major cities. November is the Women Abuse Prevention Month, and November 25th is the International Day for Elimination of Violence Against Women. The Women and Children's Shelter of Barrie has been helping women who are the victims of violence, sexual abuse, and human trafficking. It provides a 24-hour phone helpline, resources, counseling, and shelter. It has completed its 40 years of existence this year. Its development manager, Katie Taylor, however, called this a bittersweet moment. I talked to her to know why, what services it offers, and how Barrie residents can participate in its fundraising to help the women in need. Hi, Katie.
Well,
Hi.
good afternoon. Yeah,
Appreciate your time.
of course. Any opportunity for us to have this opportunity, we welcome it. So please always reach out.
November is the Women Abuse Prevention Month. And I was checking your website, and on your website, I saw a report, the best and worst places to live to be a woman in Canada. That report was published in 2019.
Yep.
And out of 26 major cities in Canada, Barrie ranked the worst city for women. And we just moved here to Barrie. We were in Mississauga. Before that, we were in Boston, Arlington, Massachusetts, suburb of Boston. And I was telling my wife, and she was kind of shocked to know that.
Yeah.
So, given this is the Women Abuse Prevention Month, and the ranking of Barrie in 2019. So, could you talk a little bit about those two aspects?
Because of that study, we had developed, we had applied for a government grant and had achieved creating a women's advocacy council. And so the report was very specific in how the women were ranking these cities. And so I'll just kind of touch on the pillars in which women could rank. So economic security, education, leadership, health, and security. And so we ranked dead last on all of those areas. And so what the Women's Advocacy Council is trying to accomplish is change and conversation and encouraging and empowering women to use their voices in these areas, so that we aren't viewed as the worst city to live in Barrie, and all across the board, to be able to achieve equity in these areas. So our council is comprised of an eclectic group of women who are already in our community doing the work, and they come from various backgrounds, which is incredible, because we do want that collective voice, and we want to be as inclusive as possible. So these women work together, whether it's in a very quiet way, petitioning and surveying and gathering information to be able to move some things forward, or whether it's at a rally, or any chance to advocate or have presence in our community and beyond, really, because it's not just Barrie, it is for South Simcoe, or Simcoe County, excuse me. So that's that's our part in trying to achieve women's equity, essentially. It really is just that fundamental. It seems like it should be that easy. So yeah, that's kind of what I can certainly talk more about the Women's Advocacy Council, but we can also kind of talk about November being so important to the violence against women sector. And November, yes, we do have a month dedicated to this, but it is something that we need to talk about all year, And it's something that collectively as a community, violence that affects women and children doesn't just affect women and children. It
Yeah.
is something that affects all of us. And so for us to have um, this opportunity, this campaign, awareness campaign, to talk about how people can help and what they can do is so important.
City council, right? So in city council, we have 11 councillors, and out of that, only 2 are women. Both MPs are men. So that leadership was one of the criterias in that report where Barrie ranks the lowest. So what do you think needs to be done in order to
Something that our agency has just been fortunate enough to be a part of is the Bright Spot. And so that's an initiative that had been brought forward from the Barrie Improvement Association, and in partnership with the Women and Children Shelter of Barrie, and there's a few other partners, but it's essentially having conversations with business owners about the downtown space and how, again, historically over time, the downtown space has been not a very inviting place after certain hours, especially for women and their personal safety. And so an incident had happened last year where a woman was actually attacked. Her and her friend were just walking downtown and they were physically attacked, and she spoke publicly about this incident, and there were steps taken immediately. That's just a small example of one woman who had experienced violence on the streets of Barrie. I know I personally have never felt safe, even in daytime, and this is something that is such a great example of just how different it is for a woman versus potentially a man.
Yeah.
So I think when you're looking at these specific areas, yes, I think historically over time, but I think now women are just being, we're trying to use our voices. We're being encouraged to use our voices. So I think that this isn't a shock to most women who have been living in Barrie and the area for some time, but I think that this is an opportunity for change to happen. And as devastating as it is, I'm sure for some folks to you had said you and your wife had just moved from the city and to Barrie, and trying to make sense of it. I think that those conversations were always happening very quietly, but now there's an opportunity for women to use those voices and to advocate on behalf of themselves. And the government was listening, and the government was willing to take action on that. And so being able to continue these initiatives and these having these discussions is just so important.
So talking about Barrie shelter, so can you provide a little bit background about I believe it started in 1981. So how did it start and
yeah. So I think like most shelters, the Women and Children Shelter of Barrie grassroots did start from women. I believe that it might have even been a church, and women just whether it was a church or maybe they had moved to a bigger space to accommodate more women, but essentially it was just women in the community knowing that other women were experiencing violence in their homes and offering them a safe haven to escape that violence. You had mentioned 1981 is when we first were essentially established, and so this year would mark our 40th year of providing service and support. And it's a very interesting acknowledgement, because we are so proud of the work that we've been able to provide to women and their children who are experiencing such trauma and continue to experience trauma. But it's not a happy anniversary to say that we've been needed in the community for 40 years and know that we continue to have those needs. You know, we just, it's just a very bittersweet acknowledgement, I think. So we now today, we're a 27-bed emergency shelter. We have a 24-hour crisis line. We have counselors that provide group and individual counseling. We have outreach support services, which include transitional support housing, as well as family and court support services. So really, the journey for a woman who is experiencing abuse, especially if there's complications, I mean, not even complications, if there's children that are involved, there's a lot of processes that the women will need to go through. And we are there with these women every step of the way to help support them wherever they are in their journey.
So what is the occupancy when it comes to the shelter? Is it something is always in demand, or there are empty spaces? How?
So prior to COVID, I had said that we do have 27 beds. Those are typically always full. Of those 27 beds, we have 2 beds that are solely dedicated to victims of human trafficking. So that means that if our shelter, at the moment, our shelter is full, but we would have two beds that are dedicated so that if we get a call from a woman who has been trafficked and needs emergency shelter, we will have that space available for her, because it is so important for her to be able to have a refuge to go to. And so again, prior to the pandemic, we would be able to accommodate up to 35 women and children, because we would be able to, you know, pull cots out and double people up in rooms and families. Again, it's a congregate setting. COVID has been very tricky to kind of navigate around that. And so even the rooms that we've had to renovate thanks to donations from supporters in the community to renovate bathrooms to accommodate individual bathrooms for those rooms. In the event that we are full and a woman calls, we will help that woman find alternative shelter at another shelter, and just encourage her, especially if she doesn't want to stay in the Barrie area, because her children might be going to school or she works in Barrie, to just call. So the women can call as often as they need to, and hopefully we do have a space available for them.
Is there a need for more facilities, more more beds in in Barrie and shelters?
So what's the interesting piece of what seems to be happening, again, it's just been highlighted, I think, because of the pandemic, but the housing market in Barrie is there's really no thing as affordable housing, especially when it comes to a woman with children who's on Ontario Works and gets $700 a month. We know that rent is not $700 a month. And we know that woman also has diapers to buy for her children and groceries to feed her children and herself. And so women are unable to find affordable housing, so they stay in the shelter longer. And so where do these women go? Where, what are their options? Fortunately, this year we were able to purchased a second stage transitional home.
Okay.
So that was, again, a donation from a woman who had been watching our work very closely and knew that she wanted to leave her legacy to us in a meaningful way. And when she had passed, she had donated her estate to us to be able to make this purchase.
That's very generous. Wow.
Yes. So, and I do share that for other folks in the community, that to be inspired by this, because in April, we were able to purchase a home in Barrie. It's a 4-bedroom residential home, and we've been full since we've purchased and made the necessary updates for that house. And women that were in our emergency shelter have transitioned to the second stage home and are living out of this home and rebuilding their lives and working, and their kids are going to school. And it is wonderful because we've been able to free up, right? It's that flow through of traffic. And so, you know, this was a first for us. There are other shelters that exist in Ontario or in Canada that have multiple transitional homes that have second and third stage housing, because it's not just about getting these women off on their own. These women have gone through such incredible trauma and continue to need such specific supports that we provide. So being able to create these spaces for women to allow them to have these wraparound services is so incredible, because we know that we're helping to stop the cycle of abuse with providing as much support as we can on their journey as they're experiencing it wherever they are.
This is a little bit maybe off topic, but you know, my wife watched, I don't know, you are aware, there's a series on Netflix called Maid.
You know, this isn't the first time that somebody's brought this up. I haven't been able to watch it. I feel I would personally be triggered. I just feel like it is a very real depiction. I don't know, but I think somebody had asked me the question if that's kind of a good insight as to. And was that kind of going to be your question?
Yeah, so my question was, you know, this, and it is based on, you know, real life story of a woman, and when I did not watch it. My wife watched it, and you know, and when I told her that, you know, I will be talking to you, and she said, you know, maybe because what really caught her attention in that series as a woman was the setup. The system is set up by men. So women has to prove herself. You know, if she's in abuse or, you know, facing violence, you know, she has to file a complaint, you know, file an FIR in order to prove that, because, you know, no one, people think that, you know, she just wants for fun, she wants to get out of our house and, you know, wants to live in a shelter. So there is, this system is set up by men. And so that's my question was about, is there, you know, are these challenges in terms of, you know, trusting the woman who is facing the violence or sexual abuse, and, you know, so she's having those, you know, facing this issue. On top of that, when she goes out to seek help, she has to, you know, prove herself, and that could be, you know, triggering that trauma, or that could be even bigger trauma than, you know, she was already facing. So is there, what is your experience with dealing with the system, the government system or the system?
So it's such a great question. I personally, I feel like this would be such a great conversation to have with Teresa, our executive director.
Okay.
Because I feel like she would be able to speak more specifically to even the lead up to your question in terms of it was a very interesting lead up in terms of identifying that that the system was essentially created and the process that these women have to go through, it's existential. And so I don't know if I can really speak to that, but what I can say is this is why we have our child court support advocate. This is why we have our transitional housing support These women are staff members, are counselors, are frontline. These women have years of experience and know these systems and know how to help women navigate. So there obviously needs to be a big change, and that's what we're kind of trying to accomplish through the Women's Advocacy Council, because the efforts that are being created by shelters just keeping up with, as opposed to taking a real preventative approach, it will never end. Violence will never end if we're just trying to, if it's just the aftermath. So
other than shelter, you offer other services, whether it's crisis line, human trafficking, outreach. So can you explain a little bit about how, for example, the 24-hour crisis line works, and what kind of support staff you have, and what kind of calls and how many calls you received, maybe monthly or yearly?
So we do receive, I believe, 1,100 calls annually.
Oh, wow.
And we do, so our crisis line is 24 hours. And those women, and any woman, any person can call the crisis line, even if you believe somebody is being abused and you're reaching out on behalf of them. But if a woman is being abused, she will call our crisis line as many times as she needs to. We also will see women, here in the shelter, and they go through their journey, and a couple years later they're calling to just check in because they've entered into a new relationship and just want to ensure that it is a healthy relationship, and that the building blocks that we've been able to support the woman with, she's using all of those tools and resources. So a woman can continue to use our services essentially for forever, for life. And so we have our outreach team do work in our shelter, but they also work out of the transitional home. So again, those women that live in the transitional home have, again, the support service right there for them.
When it comes to violence against women, Indigenous, women or women of, color face disproportionately, more violence than, maybe white women in that case. So, are there any specific services that you have for, for Indigenous women, or?
So we work closely with our Barrie Native Friendship Center. We work closely with any other agency partners that are specific in what their approach is, including Indigenous. And so if a woman specifically needs services that accommodate her culture or whatever it is, if we're unable to provide those services and supports, we do have a whole host of a network of resources and partners to be able to connect her with. And again, knowledge is so powerful that people don't know unless they reach out, and that's usually, women stay in abusive relationships for all sorts of reasons, including what you had mentioned, and the process to rebuild her life is extraordinary. It's the fear of leaving. She's been living, she knows the abuse. She's, been experiencing abuse for however long. So it's so jarring for her to have to start from the bottom, and that's essentially what we're trying to achieve, is to help her on her journey to be free from that violence and abuse.
So does having children makes it more difficult for women to get out of the relationship, and like how much how much important for you for the shelter to offer, because you're not only for women and children, all right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
is it more difficult for women to get out the relationship when they have children, and
absolutely.
what kind of support you provide for women with children?
Absolutely. Just as, people can't seem to understand, and because it's so hard to try to understand that anybody would inflict violence upon children.
Mhm.
Um, the kids that we see, they've gone through trauma. They've experienced some real abuse. And the work that our children and youth program do is incredible. Um, when the children show up in our shelter, they've just been completely uprooted from their lives, sometimes in the middle of the night, with in their jammies with mom just showing up at the shelter, and they have really no idea or concept. And again, we kind of talk about the cycle of abuse and the prevention that we're trying to accomplish. And it does start with the children. It really starts with educating our youth on boundary setting and healthy relationships, and all these pieces. And so what our child and youth program is able to achieve is, when they do arrive, yes, it might take them a second to kind of adjust, but they're safe. The best part about the shelter is the safety that the children immediately feel. They see their mom talking with other women,
Yeah.
enjoying their time, playing in the backyard together, doing their schoolwork with other children. So there's such important measures that we take, and it's such delicate work, that our children and youth program takes on. But it and we always say it, the work is really heavy and dark,
Yeah.
but the positive is these children are experiencing love, and um they're ultimately sad to leave because of just how normal the shelter
Yes.
felt, right? I think that's kind of the best way to describe, and
And having a safe place, it's
it's a
even though
safe
it's not
place.
very, just having a safe place,
Yeah,
they're not scared all the time, they are not
yeah,
scared of
not
violence, they are treated with respect. Yeah, that means a lot.
yeah, to not have that feeling of always, being scared or being nervous or
Yeah.
listening, or it's for children who have experienced trauma and abuse. It's a long process and a long road ahead for them. But the first, right, if this is the first step, and the first step in that journey, then we're doing good.
Yeah. So one of the services you offered is human victims of human trafficking.
Mhm.
You said you already have 2 beds dedicated for the victims of human trafficking. So what is your experience? What is the experience of shelter when when it comes to victims of human trafficking? Are they from Barrie, or are they come from all over Canada? And what kind of services you offer for them?
They do come from all over. We will even get calls from police, potentially in other provinces,
Mhm.
that a woman, has been experiencing human trafficking, and is looking for a shelter in Barrie because maybe she has family close, or whatever the case is. And we say, yep, absolutely, and they make those arrangements. So um, the the issue that Barry seems to experience in the terms of the volume that we seem to be witnessing is the location of Barry, and how um, it's kind of a gateway to the north and to the south. And so people don't really realize that Barry is quite the hub for human trafficking. And um, and it is because of how accessible it is to other large cities that also are experiencing human trafficking.
So in terms of now offering the counseling services, so do they differ when it comes to women who is facing, let's say, domestic abuse versus a victim of human trafficking, or somebody who is facing dealing with the drug addiction issues, and how do you deal with those different problems?
So those are built in, like those are all, that's great that you've identified, because these are the complexities that are often associated with women that are experiencing abuse or human trafficking. And so again, if we're unable to, if we don't have a specific, mental health and addiction support worker at the shelter, then we will refer, we will work closely with, we will have workers work with our clients. So again, whatever those needs are, we work with the women and we identify those complexities, and then we do our best to match them with the services and the supports that already exist in the community, to be able to get them the help that they need for those specifics.
We are hopefully coming out of pandemic, and you said due to the pandemic you had to scale down the number of beds that you were providing due to legitimate concern of COVID-19. So did you see any uptick in because then a lot of women were forced to stay at home, they couldn't go out for work, so I'm not sure if that increased increased in such instances of, did you see an uptick in women seeking more services during the pandemic, and how do you see the trend right now?
So at the beginning of the pandemic, it was odd. We didn't quite know what to expect, as everybody was experiencing. Our crisis lines, we went through some periods where our crisis line would be very quiet. And we know that, that's because women were locked at home with their abuser. And, typically when a woman who is experiencing violence, it's when the abuser leaves is when she's able to make that connection with us or to reach out for help. So women didn't have those opportunities. So there were periods of time where we wouldn't hear or see any woman who was reaching, not anyone, but it was quiet. And we know that that's not a thing for a crisis line to be quiet. So that was very concerning. And then there would be times where it was very intense, both the amount of calls and the intensity of the abuse. And so we had experienced all of those, and really the conversations that we would have with the women is just like all of the options that she has to weigh when deciding whether to leave her life and the abuser behind is relocating her family in a congregate setting where there's a potential of there's a risk of potential COVID-19. And so women had to add that to their list of choices to make. And some women decided to stay in their home with the abuse, which I had mentioned before. That's, as unsafe as it is, it makes the most sense to them. So again, I do say about COVID-19 and the pandemic as a whole that it has definitely shed some interesting light, and maybe has given certain folks a perspective that they might not have considered in terms of intimate partner violence. And I think if anything, like I said, for 40 years we've been doing this work, with no end in sight,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And so, if anything, the pandemic has just kind of brought some of that to light to folks that might not have been necessarily aware that this is a true crisis in its own.
Yeah, so that, it's interesting that you mentioned about the pandemic. So is it because we have seen, for example, the senior care homes, the outbreak in those, and now they are providing more funding, trying to revamp the whole the model. So is this something going on with the shelters, for example, because you received some funding from the Canadian government, and do you believe that is it necessary now because you have the congregation setting, and that prevents women from seeking the help for fear of contracting COVID for them or for their children? So is there a need to revamp and think for more funding and for example providing houses, small houses rather than the congregation setting? So what changes do you think needs to be done? We might have another pandemic in store, who knows?
Pandemic aside, everything that
Yeah.
you just listed is exactly what it is that we need. We are partially funded for the 27 beds, and that is just a small amount of money that we do see. The grant that I talked about was a grant that we applied for. So programs like our Women's Advocacy Council, programs like our violence prevention, those are grants that we've applied for. And when the money is done, the money is done. And so the fundraising piece, we need to fundraise a significant amount of money just for operating costs because of all of the additional supports and services that are basic supports and services, not to mention what we continue to need to provide, that the women are telling us that they need. So funding would be incredible. Grants are great, but it's not sustainable.
Mhm.
It's not sustainable money. So for the government to really intervene in a way that, it really comes down to housing. And so for shelters to be able to have access to, and the building that we're in right now, it's a 30-year-old building. And
Mhm.
so the maintenance and the upkeep, it's
Yeah.
where does this money come from? So it's a very we can talk about this for the whole interview in terms of what's needed in this sector. But yes, definitely money.
Yeah.
definitely money. And again, I'm so appreciative of the supporters in our community that have been rallying beside us for 40 years, 10 years, 15 years, whatever it is. We do have a great group of people that see the work that we do and continue to support us. But again, there's still so much work that
Yeah.
has to be done.
I I'm not sure how much, but there must be some percentage, of women that, because during the pandemic we have seen there is an uptick in an opioid crisis, and Barrie has been hit hard by that as well. So I wanted to understand, because the city council approved a site, safe injection supervised consumption site, and that has been now stuck in some opposition from local businesses and political leaders. So how significant you think is the impact of opioid crisis on women, and as a result of Barrie shelter to provide those services for women who are facing the opioid addiction issue?
So um I see the parallel. The women that we support at the base is women that have been experiencing abuse. And so women who are also experiencing those other complexities that we talked about earlier, and in particular opioids, it only makes sense to be able to help those that need help.
Oh.
And so I think it's a very simple and basic, if you don't understand, that's one thing. And I think part of fear and part of the resistance includes fear, and fear is just not knowing and not understanding, or not taking the initiative to educate yourself. So I do respect other perspectives, of course, but I just, for us, of course, we will always come from a perspective of wanting to support women who are experiencing any type of crisis, and any type of anything that they're seeking help for. So that of course would include that. I don't know if I've answered your question, but I think I might have.
Yeah, and I think you did. And so my last question is about, on your website you have, abuse checklist and tips for living. So I don't know if you know that on top of your head, but if you can just briefly talk about how women can identify, because sometimes you don't even, the women who is facing don't even understand what's going on, because there are so many factors in life. So a little bit about abuse checklist and tips for living.
Yeah, that's interesting that you had said that, because a few women, I will just make mention too, we do have a survivors group, an active survivors group. And so these are women that have used our services, and are now in a place in their journey to be able to help other women who are kind of starting on their journey. And our survivors group are incredible women who use their stories and their strength of what has happened to them, to educate the rest of us on what it is that we should be doing. And so we do right by them, essentially. So when you speak to some women, though, it's not until they might tell their story that somebody questions and says, that doesn't sound right. Because again, as we've mentioned, women have been just living in the abuse for so long because of social status, right? Because of their business partners, because they have kids together, they have a house together, they have all these things, they have a life, they've built a life together. And again, we know the cycle of abuse. It couldn't just be this one time, but it's not just this one time. So I will just quickly go through our abuse, our tips, abuse checklist. And I'll also just say that all of this information that we've talked about is on our website, barrieshelter.com. I know that you've said that you've referenced the website quite a bit. So our crisis line is also available on our website. It's 705-728-2544. So I'll just read a couple of these, Deepak, if that's okay. So as I had mentioned, it can be subtle and insidious, and it can happen intermittently or occur frequently and consistently. And the word violence, some folks only associate with physical violence, but violence is, abuse and violence is synonymous. So if you're being emotionally abused, financially abused, economically abused, that's still violence. That's still considered violence. So we do have this checklist available on our website. So I'll just read a couple of these. So puts you down verbally, calls you names, shouts or yells at you, ridicules your appearance, beliefs, religion, or race, is jealous and accuses you of having affairs, isolates you from family and friends, tells you how to dress or act, criticizes you constantly, blames you for problems in the relationship, withholds information about your finances, harms or kills family pets, forces you into unwanted sexual acts. There are so many more.
Yeah.
And this is just a quick synopsis of what some women and children are experiencing as we talk. And again, just to reference our survivors group, there's one woman, we've published a book, a Shelter Me book, and it's stories and reflections of survivors of intimate partner violence. And we just launched that book this year. And one of the women speaks in her piece saying that she realized that she was in an abusive relationship, but the scariest part was reaching out for help, because you again, the fear of the unknown. But it was the best decision, obviously, that she had made. So we always love having these opportunities and these connections, because if there's one woman who is watching this and can take something away from this, that all she needs to do is to just reach out, to just have a conversation. And there's no judgment and no bias. And at the end of the day, we're not telling a woman what to do. We're giving her the options. We're giving her options. And if that woman chooses to return to the abuse, we will still be here. We will still be here, and we will still continue to help her when she decides to reach out again. So yeah, we're always just here, and you just have to reach out.
Yeah, I think that's what, as a man, that's what, my question was, because a lot of people think these, services, maybe Barrie Shelter or other services that help women, these are trying to break families. A lot of people think that, people think that these services are trying to, push women into one direction or other. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, you are not, making decision for those women. You are, providing them with the services. And that's what, I see on the website. So, thank you so much for, mentioning that. And
My
because
pleasure.
that also helps men. And when I was reading the checklist, I thought, maybe I should let my wife know about the checklist, because as a man, I might not be aware about, these things, but, I should accept that it should be her call. It should be her judgment that how she's treated in this household in my present. And that's what I'm going to do after this call is I'm going to send her the checklist, not only for her, but anybody, she knows that, they should be aware about this as well. And
I'm
yeah.
so glad you mentioned that, because that is such an important piece of the conversations that we continue to have. And in particular for the month of November, I have these conversations with women all the time. It's, women supporting women and how wonderful and beautiful it is, but having men like yourself acknowledge that and be so aware of the part that they play in this discussion is just so important. So I'm glad that you mentioned that, because it is about that. So yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and just one last thing, it's less of a question but more of the acknowledgement that when I was going to the website, I saw the advisory council, and I'd never seen such a diverse group of people associated with the organization. You have Black women, South Asian, you have Indigenous, you have people, women from different background. So I don't know if it's a question at all, but how, maybe this is for the other organization, how did you come to achieve this outreach that went beyond just the white and Caucasian community and went to the other races as well?
So a lot of that had come from the council members themselves. So we had initially formed it intentionally that way. We need the collective voice of all of these women to understand the full scope of experiences,
Mhm.
because my experience will not be the same experience as your wife's.
Yeah.
So having those voices and being able to come together to make real change and movement is part of it. It has to be. Otherwise,
Yeah.
what are we doing collectively? So as we continue, as council members step off, we continue to uphold that, and we hold the council members who are currently sitting there accountable, and we ask them for their nominations to look in our community as to who would be the next best fit to come join us on our council. And again, these are women who are already so active, using their voices in their own endeavors, that we've seen and we've acknowledged and appreciated that, and being able to have them join in this, again, this collective approach is just it's quite beautiful, actually.
Yeah, that's good. So any final message for women, for men, or society in general about violence against women, and especially in this month of November?
So on November 25th, we are will be at City Hall at 1 p.m. We will be raising a flag as the awareness component to mark the National Day of Elimination of Violence Against Women. So that's on November 25th. Also starting on that day is a campaign that's referred to as 16 Days of Activism. So starting November 25th and ending on December 10th, which is International Human Rights Day, for those 16 days, we are intentional about what we can do collectively to end violence against women. So we encourage people in the community, men, women, everybody, to use their voices and to identify what can you do. So Deepak, you just told me that after our interview, you're going to go and have that, it might be an awkward kind of conversation to have with your partner, but you've identified that already you see this abuse checklist and it doesn't necessarily resonate with you, but
Yeah.
it's going to resonate with your wife.
Yeah.
So right then and there, just that mindfulness, and then using your voice and having that conversation. So we encourage folks to make their own pledge. And whether it's making their pledge and doing a social campaign, we'd love to see it. We'd love for you to tag us in it, but it could be as quiet as having a conversation with your kids, having a conversation with your networking group that you met with last week, and the one gentleman made an offside comment. It was a very misogynistic comment, and not being silent, just kind of using your voice and standing up, because these are those uncomfortable instances. That's the change. That's when change happens, is when it doesn't feel necessarily right, but what the outcome's going to be. So I encourage everybody to make their own pledge and to encourage these opportunities as well. So reach out to us, learn more about what it is that we do, invite us to speak, get involved more, volunteer for the shelter. There's so much that everybody can do. And so I think it lies in the individual, what their capacity is, but we would love to have folks come out on November 25th. It is outdoors. We're very mindful with pandemic and what we need to do around those pieces. But yeah, there's quite a bit that each individual can do. And because we were talking about fundraising as well, with the we call it Wrapped in Courage, which I'm wearing a purple scarf, but we have men's neckties available, so we can pack. So because the amount of money that we need to raise for operations is upwards of $400,000 annually, and because of the landscape of the pandemic with fundraising in general has been just not ideal, we rely on our community members to support us in these fundraising initiatives as well. So Wrapped in Courage, we sell scarves and ties.
Yeah, that's
And
awesome. Yeah.
yeah, and so the purple is for the whole month of November. So we always encourage folks to wear purple, show their support. And the symbol of the tie is wrapping a woman in courage. We know that the strength that it takes a woman to leave an abuser, we know that it's not enough for just her strength. So we're showing the solidarity, excuse me, for women who are potentially leaving abusers and for women that have left abusers. And so we're just honoring them and supporting them, and ultimately being able to support the shelter financially. So that's one more way in which people can participate this month.
Yeah, awesome. So please say one tie for me and just let me know, when and where I can pick it up.
Absolutely.
How do I pay, and how do I come to collect the tie?
So go on our website,
Okay.
berryshelter.com. There's a bunch of different, like we have like 11 different patterns. So it comes with cufflinks. And so that's the tie. And then there's a little pocket square.
Oh, wow.
So there's a bunch of different options and patterns. And then if you just click the button, it'll go to an email.
Okay, I will grab one scarf and one tie for me.
And the scarves are available too. I'm assuming you're going to buy for your wife, and there's a bunch of patterns on there as well.
Yeah, I'll check that out. Thank you so much, Katie, for your time. And I'm sorry that you mentioned that you don't feel safe in Barrie. And as a man, I will do my best to make this world safer for women. But thank you so much for your time and sharing the work you have been doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity, Deepak. It was really great chatting with you today.
Yeah, thank you so much. Have a nice day. Okay,
you
bye.
too. December 6th is International Day of Remembrance on Violence Against Women. So we acknowledge December 6th as that day because it's the anniversary of the I always mispronounce the name, the women that were murdered in university in Montreal, the Montreal massacre.
Yeah.
So we, on December 6th every year, we hold a candle vigil, and we acknowledge all those women that were murdered. We acknowledge murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. And then we receive from an agency partner a list of women and girls that were murdered in Ontario over the last year. And so every year we get an updated list, and that list consists of the women and girls' pictures, their names, where they're from, a little bit about them, and how and ultimately who killed them or how they were murdered. And we show that slideshow presentation. We honor those women, we honor our survivors.